Well, former Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews received a VIP welcome in Beijing yesterday, rubbing shoulders with the world's dictators like he was on an episode of The Apprentice, authoritarian edition. And it's no surprise the Chinese Communist Party loves him so much. After all, who wouldn't adore a visiting politician who openly admires your brand of government? It turns out that back in March, Dan Andrews graced Chinese television with high praise for Xi Jinping's commitment to fighting climate change. Not just a casual nod, mind you. Andrews insisted China deserves much more credit than it gets for its heroic march toward green energy.
If you look at China's record, massive investments and a big switch, a very big switch, one that I don't think China quite gets the international credit and acclaim for that it should get.
And Andrews didn't stop there. He made sure to express a keen fascination with central government.
Well, it's really important to see President Xi, as well as other senior leaders across China, so consistently speak about changing the way economic growth occurs. I'm really looking forward to hearing more about how Chinese government, the central government, sees that unfolding in the years to come.
Joining me now is Nationals MP Barnaby Joyce. Barnaby, is Daniel Andrews right? China deserves far more credit for their efforts to curb emissions, don't they?
It's so absurd. I don't know whether it's pathos. It's actually grueling. It's wrong. It's bad. Everything he's done. First of all, China is currently under construction 275 gigawatts of coal-fired power. We only have 22 in total in Australia. So spare me this idea that they're out of coal. They're expanding their coal fleet every day massively. Now, they might be expanding their intermittent power fleet, but nothing like what they're doing with coal. A massive amount of energy for them comes from coal. And if you've got intermittent power, remember, in China, they've got things such as hydroelectricity from the Three Gorges Dam. Is Mr. Andrews suggesting that we start damming every river? Happy to support him if he wants to put a few more dams in. But more to the point, he is at a parade. Those military ordinances that you saw going along, the missiles, the tanks, the hypersonics, they're not designed for anywhere else except the possibility that they come in our direction. He's actually looking at the ordinances that in the current climate could be the reason that tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Australians are killed. And he's sitting there at the parade with a totalitarian dictator and the totalitarian dictator friends. It's Lord Haw sort of approach, this one. It's unfathomable how he somehow decided that he would be at that parade.
So, Barnaby, what you've said about China's emissions or lack of reduction of emissions, does Daniel Andrews just not know about that, or is there another agenda being run here?
Well, I wouldn't suggest, but one could say, look at a simile and people can make up their own minds. When people are involved in propaganda, when people have an ulterior purpose, they can sometimes bend the truth. Because what he's saying, if you believe the inference that they're all going to intermittence, that is just not the truth. Did he talk about the Uyghurs and basically slave labour building the solar panels? Did he give a mention to that? I mean, every time you turn on a light with a solar panel, just think if it's come from China, it might be slave labour. Do you condone that? Are you happy with that? What if the shoes came from slave labour? Would you wear them? It is what it is. He was in a photo with Kim Jong-un. He's basically, starving his own people to death. He's built nuclear weapons at the expense of feeding his own people. He has locked them up in a sort of a Stalinist prison state. He was standing there with Vladimir Putin. He invaded a country in Europe, and he's still invading it. Hundreds of thousands have been killed. And with Xi Jinping, who basically put aside the rule of law and just decided to take over the South Pacific, ramming Philippine boats, disputes with Japan, spies in Australia. We're hacking into our computers. Are you supporting them, Dan? You know, Daniel, you know, if you like it that much, Daniel, well, don't come home because your home's obviously there.
Well, Barnaby, I want to talk a bit more about him being at that military parade, but just staying with his comments on China's emissions, I guess it makes sense that he admires central planning because really, if you're going to go full renewables for net zero, it does require a lot of government intervention. At least on that point, he's been consistent.
Well, I'll take up on two things. They're not renewables, they're intermittents. They're swindle factories. They're rolled gold annuities for domestic billionaires and overseas companies, some of which I have to admit, Daniel, are Chinese. They're the impoverishment of those who are poor by driving up the price of power. They're secret, commercial in confidence, not for publication in the budget papers. Is there any other section of the economy we would have such clothed in such secrecy where taxpayers' money went? And central planning, you can plan it all you like. But if you're going to have intermittents from wind and solar, the lights will go out. You just can't do it. Physics wins the argument. You get to a certain level and then it just does not work. There is not an economy on this planet worthwhile talking about that runs itself on intermittent solar and wind. We can't even make the intermittent solar and wind capital. Goodness gracious me, you think you're going to run your economy on it, and the proof is in the pudding. Your power prices have gone through the roof in direct correlation with the more and more intermittents that have come on. You have had record insolvencies in small business. You are putting poor people out of their house. You have a cost of living crisis. You've deindustrialised this nation down to 2 oil refineries. Our steel industry is on its knees. Plastics industry is gone. Urea industry is gone. Industrial glass is gone. Aluminium is on its knees. You don't have to prove anything, Mr. Daniel. It's not the biblical Daniel, it's the disastrous Daniel.
Barnaby, as you well know, politics is a muddy business. Issues are rarely black and white. But let's be honest, the question of whether or not it's appropriate or even remotely wise for the former Victorian Premier to have attended the Communist Party military parade and pose for photos with the West's sworn enemies, well, that one's, I would say, about as complicated as a stop sign. Even Senator Jackie Lambie gets it.
I have to ask, when he fell down the stairs, not only did he damage his back, did he actually do something to his head? I mean, what is he thinking? And I have to say this. If Home Affairs isn't going through him with a fine tooth comb, then they bloody well should be. It's sitting on a very fine back. What sort of person, where is his political judgment or human judgment, because he's not in politics anymore, where's his human judgment would think that you should be standing in a photo like that?
I don't know, maybe everyone in Labor has hit their heads. Dan Andrews' protege and current Victorian Premier, Jacinta Allen, refused outright to criticise her mate for hobnobbing with dictators. In fact, she praised his attendance in Beijing, saying it was good for Victoria. She released this statement saying, "It's good for Victoria that Daniel Andrews is held in such high regard by the people of China. Victoria is an old friend of China, and these connections are so valuable for our state." And then there was Victorian Transport Minister Gabrielle Williams. She didn't have an opinion on the ethics of sidling up to dictators. She was just relieved that she didn't get an invite, which I think is a polite way of saying, thank God I didn't have to choose.
This is not an event that I would likely be invited to, nor is it one that I would attend personally. But in saying that, this is a decision that Dan has made as a private citizen, and it is one that he is the only person that should appropriately speak to.
Well, Barnaby, what about Federal Minister for Industry Ted Ayres? Surely he understood a Labor luminary should not be posing for photos with Putin and Kim Jong-un.
We are focused not on headlines and press releases, but on acting carefully and consistently in a way that is calibrated to serve Australia's national interest, not hot gossip and headlines.
Yes, focused on the national interest, with nothing to say about how Dan Andrews being in Beijing might affect the national interest. Coward. But what about Prime Minister Anthony Albanese? Surely he would bring some moral clarity, some gravitas, some leadership to the issue. Asked for his opinion, here's how he responded in Parliament today.
They are delulu, Mr Speaker. I am not responsible for what every Australian citizen does. What I'm responsible for, is what
members on my left.
Is what our government does.
Barnaby, the absolute inability for anyone from Labor to come out and say what you said earlier, that Dan Andrews was wrong to be there, is just astonishing. What conclusion should we draw?
Well, the problem is, Mr Albanese, Prime Minister of Australia, you are responsible for commentary on what your views are, on what Dan Andrews has done. And what they can't get themselves to say is, I condemn the actions of Dan Andrews. He is neither a representative nor his government, nor do I condone any Australians' actions that would stand in a photo shoot with people responsible for the deaths of God knows how many hundreds of thousands of people between them. I mean, surely that's not too hard to say. And that is the problem. They can't say it. And this sort of this unwritten law, this sort of subterranean context of this tribalism says that no, the bleeding obvious that everybody knows is wrong. They can't let those words pass Mr Albanese's lips, Ms Allen's lips, and Mr Ayres' lips. They just can't say it. And this goes to show what an absolute farce the authenticity and honesty and transparency, and basically, you know, the Australian people just want you to say the bleeding obvious. And why can't you come out and say, look, I've known Daniel for a long while, but I am absolutely disgusted by his actions, and he shouldn't have done that. And I'm afraid that there are times even friends have to disagree. And on this instance, I fervently disagree, and I find it abhorrent that he would stand in that photo. And if he just did that, then people say, okay, we move on.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. You should be a speechwriter for the Prime Minister, Barnaby. You'd improve his performance out of sight. I appreciate your time tonight. Thanks so much for joining me.
My pleasure.